Hi everyone, Mike here. I want to make another short video for this week. I usually will make one each week. There'll be three things I want to cover this week. It will take a little bit longer than last time, but still not a super long video. The first thing I want to talk about are the assignments and how they'll work for the rest of the semester. Remember, there's 2 tracks. That's the key thing. I'll talk a little bit about that. Secondly, I'm going to talk a little bit about how to read philosophy. I know that seems weird, like how to read, but philosophy is a special case. And this week will be your first reading assignment, and so I want to talk a little bit about that. And finally, I'm going to answer some of the questions you asked me at the end of the class poll, which I posted last night. Hopefully you get a chance to go check that out. Okay, so first, remember for the assignments, there's always 2 tracks. There are 2 tracks every week. The 2 tracks will be up and running. The first track, which will begin this week, is the general intro to philosophy. The general intro to philosophy will be metaphysics, which is the stuff of the universe, like what's the main stuff, what's underlying everything, that type of a thing. Secondly will be epistemology, which is just a fancy philosophy word for knowledge, the study of knowledge. And that will be largely focused on what is it that we actually know, how is it that we know things, stuff like that. Then we'll have ethics, which people generally understand what that word means, although in practice it's a lot harder than you might think. And then finally, political philosophy. And political philosophy will be like the sources of the politics of the world we're living in right now and how that began in philosophy and how it still affects the world even today. Okay, so that's the first track. This week we'll begin metaphysics. There will be an assignment each one of these weeks, each of the next 4 weeks for these. And the assignment will be to watch the Prezi. The Prezi will be the basics. It'll give you like a short outline and an explanation, and I'll explain a few philosophers so that you kind of get an idea of what it is metaphysics is, if you don't know. And then there'll be a reading and writing assignment attached to that. And I'll talk about this in the reading section, but there'll be a shorter reading. The readings aren't super long. There may be somewhere in the range of 5 to 15 pages, depending on which one you pick. And there'll be a writing assignment. Now, for most of the class, the writing assignment will always be the same, and I'll detail this on Cobra. I'll ask you to give a quick summary and say what you think. I'm interested in that you get the information, but I'm much more interested in did you understand it and can you apply it to like things, to real life or to your own life or to problems in the world, things like that. And so that is the key. It's going to be 50-50. Explain what you read, what you thought, and then say what you thought about it. Okay, and it's always going to be these 2 things. In the beginning, it'll be pretty short, about 2 pages, just till you do it once or twice and I see that everybody's on the same level and we can move forward. But they'll never be very long. So no more than like 4 pages ever for that. Okay, so that's the first track. So this week, watch the metaphysics Prezi. Then pick one of the readings. There'll be a group of ones you can pick from. And then read it and write a 2-page summary opinion of what you read. Okay? That's the first track. Now, the second track is the semester-long project. Now, hopefully you've gone and looked. If you haven't, go look. There are 3 main topics that I've already done all the background information for you. You're welcome to pick those. A couple of you have contacted me with separate topics. That's great. You can do that too, but you're going to need to do the background still. And so that track is if you feel like you want to work ahead or you want to go forward faster than the semester is going, that's the spot you can do it on. A couple of you asked me about this. So that is always there. That is going to be a semester-long project. You can go ahead as fast as or as much as you like, and that is easy to do for you. Okay, so this week is pretty basic. This week it'll be just a short nudge quiz. A nudge quiz is just a quiz to make sure you're keeping up. It's not that I'm going to ask you too much information. It's just a nudge. It's just to give you a little push so that I know you're starting and you know you're starting. Okay? And so for this week, I'm going to ask you a couple of questions like, what did you pick and why did you pick it? That's it, okay? Okay, so this week, those will be the 2 assignments. Watch the Prezi, do the reading and writing assignment. Track 1. Track 2, start thinking about which topic you want to pick and pick one. And take the little nudge quiz. That's it for this week, okay? So then finally, I want to talk about reading philosophy. Now, reading philosophy is not just reading. You wouldn't go into a chem class, take a chem book, switch to the middle of the book, and just start reading. You'd be lost. If you never took a chem class before, you'd be really, really lost. Okay, philosophy is a lot like that. It seems much simpler than it is. You just read something and think about it. What a philosopher is doing anyways, who the hell knows? But it's actually harder than that. Philosophy is mostly old. Most of the philosophers that you'll read, or most of the famous philosophers, wrote a long-ass time ago. And the things they wrote are in old-fashioned language. So just that alone makes it kind of hard. They also use a lot of fancy, difficult words. Philosophy is a specialized discipline. It's kind of hard to even know all the words. I can't even keep track of every single word. There's way too many. Okay? And so this is stuff that makes philosophy hard to read. And then finally, probably the worst thing of it, is they're trying to write about really, really difficult things. If I asked you, okay, what's justice? Explain it to me. You see, like, that's actually kind of hard to do. And so when this person's sitting down to do it, they're working through it and trying to explain it to you, and you're trying to go back in time, read old-fashioned language to understand a difficult concept. Okay, so reading philosophy is actually quite specialized discipline. It's a very, very useful discipline, believe it or not. So, for example, people who are philosophy majors who go to law school do much better than other types of majors. And the reason is they've learned how to read and interpret difficult texts. That's the reason. It teaches you a certain way of approaching a text, a certain way of approaching a problem, and a certain way of making your brain work. Okay? So there are significant, positive outcomes for learning to read philosophy. And if it seems hard in the beginning, don't worry about it. It's hard for lots of people. Many, many philosophers had horrible times in the beginning too. But you get better at it, just like anything else that you practice. Okay? So the first thing is reading philosophy is kind of hard and it takes a lot of time. Okay? It's not normal reading. You're not going to breeze through it in 15 minutes. That will not happen. Okay? So the second part of reading philosophy is you always need to read critically. And this is kind of one of the skills that it teaches you. As you're reading through the philosopher, working through the words, looking up words you don't know, pausing, rereading, whatever it is you need to do, then you, the whole time, need to go, okay, Plato said blah, blah, blah. Is that right? Do I agree? Do I disagree? I'm not sure. You need to be doing that the whole time. And so there's 2 separate things going on at once while you're reading. It's difficult and hard to figure out what they're saying because they're hard topics. And you got to have your brain on the whole time. You can't zone out while you're reading it, okay? So take your time. Don't worry if it takes longer than it would normally take to read 10 or 15 pages. Take your time. Be easy on yourself. If you have trouble, it's okay. That's pretty normal. And keep track of what you thought. Did you agree? Did you not agree? Because remember, there's going to be 2 parts to the assignment. What the heck did the philosopher that you picked say? And what did you think? Did you agree? Did you disagree? Did you not like it? Did you like it? Whatever it is you want to say in context of the reading. Okay? So that's the second part. Now, finally, I'm going to answer some of your questions. I wrote them on a whiteboard there, so I'm going to have to keep looking over. Sorry about that. Okay. So there were a bunch of them. I'm not going to answer them all, but I'm going to answer about 10 of them. So a couple of you asked me who my favorite philosopher is. So by far, my favorite philosopher is a philosopher named John Dewey. I did my PhD work in the intersection of evolutionary science and American philosophy when evolution first came to the United States from Darwin, from England. How did philosophers react? And I specialized in 3 philosophers when I looked at that. John Dewey was one of them. And so John Dewey, by far, is my favorite philosopher. He's a philosopher of democracy. He's a philosopher of education. And more importantly for me, he's a philosopher who takes science seriously and actually believes and follows the science rather than making shit up, which a lot of philosophers like to do. So John Dewey, my favorite philosopher. A couple of you asked me what would be my answer to the 3-word question that I asked you. And probably it's actions, not words. So I'm a pragmatist. And what that means for me is that I tend to be a little bit less interested in what people say. I'm more interested in what they do. So lots of people these days will say, oh, I'm not a racist. And yet they'll vote for racist things or do racist things and say, well, in my heart, I'm not a racist, but I don't care about what's in their heart. I don't know what's in your heart. I don't know if they're telling the truth. There's no way to tell. But what I can tell is what they do. And so it's a little example that's very current of how pragmatism would work. And so for me, the actions that you take are much more important than whatever words that are going to come out of your mouth. And so actions, not words. For the basic level of the universe, I tend to be very, very, very science-oriented. And so what I would say is whatever science says it is, it is. My metaphysics is basically whatever the science says it is. And currently, they're not really sure. There's lots of competing views. One of the favorites for a while was at the quantum level was quantum foam. There's string theory. There's multiverse theory. None of these are very certain yet, but probably it'll be something in that range, which will be the underlying main stuff of the universe. And so that's probably what I would say. A couple of you asked questions kind of related about why do people spend so much time making things up, trying to believe in things that clearly don't exist, like conspiracy theories, all kinds of political conspiracy theories these days. And what I would answer to that is that it's actually part of human psychology. As I mentioned just a second ago, I tend to be very science-oriented. And what we know is that the human brain really, 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 really doesn't like uncertainty. Uncertainty is extremely upsetting to many, many people. However, in the real world, almost everything's uncertain. Everything's percentages and probabilities. But that's upsetting. And so what people often do is they fill in that blank. There's an uncertainty and it makes them feel uncomfortable. That uncomfortable feeling causes them to create the thing. And so that's how I would answer that. A few of you asked something in the range of why did I do philosophy? And it sounds a little bit corny, but I actually chose philosophy because I want to change the world. I mentioned this a little bit before. I did other stuff in my past. I was in the military. I was a truck driver, a log haul truck driver. I did HVAC. I worked at a computer company. I did all kinds of stuff. But none of them were what I wanted to do with my life. And so I was a little bit older. I wasn't super old when I went back, but I was older than a normal student. And I went back intentionally to go into philosophy because I wanted to teach. I wanted to get people to think a little bit better about the world. And my hope is that when they think a little bit better about the world, we'll get better outcomes. We'll get better outcomes. And in general, I think it's right. I've had many, many students who go on to be philosophers themselves. That doesn't necessarily mean they become an academic philosopher, but they become a lifelong philosopher, and I'm in contact with many of them. And so that's why I went into philosophy, to try to change the world. You also asked me which philosophy do I most disagree with, and I probably disagree with philosophies that are very individualistic. I think it's just a false statement that we're individuals. Every single one of us lives in a community, whether we want to admit that or not. Unless you're some kind of primitive survival expert, you would be dead without other people. It's just a simple fact of life. You need stuff, you need clothes that other people own. You're ultra reliant on others. You were born, you would have died without parents. You were brought up, you would have died without other people. You're living in a society right now that you could not function without them, without other people. Other people are the literal key to your existence and mine. And so the philosophies that push like a selfish or individualistic worldview, I just think are false. They're just wrong. And not only that, I think they're dangerous. I think they're quite dangerous. They're definitely causing problems. And so if I had to pick, that's what I would say. Then finally, let me answer. Someone asked, would I ever climb a mountain? And yeah, of course. I've climbed many, many mountains. In fact, just last year, I went and visited my daughter in Bozeman, Montana, where she lives, and we climbed a bunch of mountains. And so I love mountains. I miss mountains, actually. I hate living in a really flat place. Okay? So remember, 3 things for this week. The assignments, always 2 tracks. This week will be metaphysics with the reading and writing assignment. Second track will be a little nudge quiz to get you to make sure you're picking a topic and getting started on the topic. Reading philosophy is way harder than you might think. Take your time. Don't freak out over it. If you have any problems, of course, just text me. Number, again, right here. Just text me. And finally, I answered some questions. And let me just say, if you have any other questions or even weird questions, feel free to text me or email me. This is my job. You're not bothering me. You're not putting me out. Please ask me questions. I don't mind at all. Okay? I'll see you next week.